I never thought a Zoom meeting could destroy my entire life in under 10 minutes. It wasn't that I couldn't foresee something bad happening. It was that I believed loyalty and resilience would still mean something at a company I had devoted nearly 2 decades to. But when Calvin Monroe's emotionless face appeared on the screen, the new CEO, who had been on the job for less than 1 year, I knew a nightmare had just begun. 3 people from HR were present too, quiet as ghosts. And I, in the middle of a grueling round of chemo, my head wrapped in a teal silk scarf, still sticking to my schedule by the hour and the minute, was now being accused of being lazy. Arya, you're not showing any effort anymore, Calvin said, his voice as sharp as a knife hitting a cutting board. For the past 3 quarters, your performance metrics have consistently fallen below expectations. We need people who deliver measurable outcomes, not emotional relationship. I clenched the hand resting on my keyboard. My eyes stayed on the screen, but my heart pounded as if it might burst. They were talking about me. Aria Connors, 45 years old, senior brand director at Everlyn Hotels, who had just celebrated 17 years with the company a few weeks ago. The one who had secured 2 expansion contracts with resort chains in Arizona and Vermont just last month. The one who still answered client emails while hooked up to an IV. But I just renewed the Clover Creek Resort contract for another 3 years, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. And my team increased customer retention across the Western region by 28% in just 2 quarters. Calvin sighed and motioned for someone from HR to continue. Overall performance still hasn't met the standard, Aria. While there have been a few bright spots, that's not what leadership is focused on during this growth phase. We need change. We? She said we, like I hadn't been a part of the Everlyn brand building team since the very beginning, back when the company was tiny, when the office only had 1 floor, and I personally designed every marketing newsletter we sent out. Today will be your last day, Calvin concluded. Your company laptop and phone will be locked after this meeting. A confirmation letter and insurance information will be sent via email. I could hear the clicking of a computer mouse echoing in my mind. Everything was too fast, too cold, too alien. I didn't cry. I wouldn't allow myself to. I just nodded slightly, my voice dry. Thank you for the opportunity. I hit leave meeting and stared at the blank screen like I was staring into a bottomless pit. Immediately, a new email notification popped up in the corner. Looking forward to next week's campaign review. Your insight always sharp. Damn, from Ethan Gray, creative director at one of my biggest partners. My chest ached. He didn't know. None of my clients had been told. I had just been tossed aside like a broken object, no longer of any use. My phone buzzed. A message appeared from Tasha, my coworker and also my closest friend at Everlyn. Call me now. You won't believe what Calvin just said during the all hands. I knew this wasn't the end, and I was about to face a truth even uglier than this. I leaned back in my chair, hollow inside, but my mind flashed through every milestone, every meeting, every late night in the old office in Portland, where I began my journey with Everlyn Hotels nearly 20 years ago. I was 28 then, fresh out of my MBA program, full of passion and naive enough to accept a below-market salary just because I believed in the company's long-term vision. Back then, Everlyn had only 3 small hotels, no brand identity, no clear strategy. I was employee number 22. The marketing department was just me and a part-time assistant. I wrote the brochures myself, cold called potential partners for collaboration, even slept on the office couch to submit a proposal the next morning to a hotel chain in Colorado. No one mentioned any of that today. No one remembered that in 2013, when the company nearly went bankrupt during the pandemic, I was the one who pitched the Stay Local, Feel Global campaign, which boosted occupancy rates by 41% in just 2 months. No one brought up how I took charge in a media storm when one of our resorts was sued over management violations and managed to preserve 3 major partnerships. No one mentioned the Strategic Employee of the Year award I received in 2019, or the customer retention rate of over 92% my team maintained for 4 consecutive years. I lived and breathed Everlyn. Remember when you had to fly to Albuquerque while running a 102-degree fever just because they wanted to meet Aria, the one who wrote the proposal? Tasha's voice shook on the other end. They're treating you like you're just a number on a spreadsheet, Aria. I'm starting to wonder if any of these years meant anything at all, I said quietly. They did, to us, to the clients, and to you too. But Calvin only cares about what shows up on a spreadsheet. I hung up, my heart bitter and burning with something stronger than sorrow, a deep, searing rage. I used to believe that if I worked hard, stayed committed long enough, didn't complain, didn't ask for much, then eventually recognition would come. But the truth is, when people like Calvin show up, they don't see human beings. They only see costs and short-term profits. I turned on my personal laptop. On my hard drive, I still had the presentation I submitted to the board last year. A strategic proposal to expand the brand into the Asian market, complete with market research, consumer behavior analysis, and a 3-year profit model. Calvin once called it ambitious, but a bit far-fetched. Then a few months later, he submitted an almost identical proposal under his own name. I sat still. My head was blank, but my hands moved on their own, opening folders, performance charts, emails confirming accomplishments, not to sue, not for revenge, but to remind myself I wasn't imagining what I had done. I had lived every stage of Everlyn, while they chose to discard me like an old chair. I opened my email, a new message from Caleb, the regional director of the South. Aria, heard you left the company. Can you give me a call? I just introduced you to a partner in Austin last week, and now they're asking where you went. I stared at the words, my chest tightening. They didn't even give clients time to transition. They cut me off like I was a burden. But they misjudged me. I'm not weak. I had suspected Calvin Monroe from the moment he first walked into the executive conference room earlier this year. A man in his 40s, hair slicked perfectly, dark tailored suit, a smile that looked like it was practiced in the mirror every morning, but eyes sharp like surgical knives. Calvin didn't have to say he was there to clean house. Every nod, every expression carried the same message. If you can't keep up, you'll be cut. I clearly remembered the first time he asked me in a weekly meeting, Aria, the conversion rate from the spring campaign only reached 3.2%. Is there any reasonable explanation for such a low number? It took me a second to realize what he was referring to. Then I explained. That campaign wasn't focused on immediate conversions. It was designed to build brand awareness among Gen X consumers. Retention rates were up by 19% compared to the previous quarter, and bookings have started climbing this month. Calvin pressed his lips together. Yet my dashboard doesn't reflect that. Maybe we need to standardize how we measure effectiveness. Standardize? That's when I knew. Calvin didn't care how we worked. He just wanted an excuse to eliminate anything that didn't fit into his profit optimization model. From that point on, things began shifting, quietly but consistently. Strategic meetings I used to lead suddenly happened without me. When I asked the project assistant, I got this reply. Calvin said you were temporarily stepping back due to health reasons. I had never requested to step back for even a single day. Then came the staff reassignments. The Ego Lodge chain development project in Oregon, which I had initiated, was handed over to Bethany, a newcomer who'd only been with the company for less than 6 months and was someone Calvin trusted. I didn't dislike Bethany, but I knew she wasn't experienced enough to handle such a complex project. She even came to me asking how to manage a PR crisis after a blogger criticized the brand on social media. I could see the ground beneath my feet being pulled away, one brick at a time, silently but deliberately. Calvin implemented a new evaluation system where everything was based on weekly performance metrics. But no one explained how the numbers were calculated. People who used to be rated excellent were now marked as average. Meanwhile, those close to Calvin were exceeding expectations in ways that didn't make sense. Tasha once told me after a meeting. Hmm, I don't think that data sheet is accurate. My project clearly went over budget, but it still got an A+ rating. I think Calvin is manipulating the numbers. I didn't respond. I knew. But I had no proof. The cruelest moment came when I overheard a conversation between Calvin and Marla in the employee lounge. They thought no one was there. Arya is getting weaker. Now's the right time, Marla said. Yeah, no one wants to cut someone going through treatment, but if the data shows she's underperforming, it'll be hard to argue. Calvin replied, voice ice cold. I stood frozen behind the door, gripping the handle until it hurt. I never imagined they'd stoop so low as to use my illness as a convenient excuse to eliminate me from the very system I helped build. That night, I didn't sleep. I reopened every report, every email thread, every PowerPoint presentation from the past 2 years. I highlighted, cross-checked, compared, and then I saw it. Some data had been altered. What Calvin called a restructuring strategy was in reality just a legal way to remove people like me, the ones who'd been around too long, who had influence, who weren't easy to control. But they forgot one thing. I don't stay silent. I've never been the type to sit quietly while the truth is twisted, and I'm about to strike back. 3 days after being fired, I received a thick envelope delivered straight to my house by express courier. The sender, Everlyn Hotels, legal department. My heart pounded, a heavy sense of dread pressing down on my chest. I pulled out the stack of documents, each page filled with bolded phrases I never imagined would be directed at me. Demand for repayment of wages corresponding to hours not worked. Breach of honesty clause in employment contract. Use of work hours for personal matters, specifically attending medical treatments during working time, may constitute fraudulent conduct. I was stunned. They were accusing me. It wasn't just termination anymore. They wanted to paint me as someone who stole company funds, even while I was sick. Hands trembling, I flipped to the next page. They demanded I repay more than $18,000. Wages calculated based on the total time I had spent at medical appointments and chemotherapy over the past 6 months. They threatened appropriate legal action if I didn't repay it within 15 days. I threw the packet onto the table. My whole body burned. I had never taken a single day off. I scheduled every chemo session on weekends, and for regular lab appointments, I always informed my team and logged into the company system from the hospital's waiting room. I once even hosted a Zoom meeting with the communications team while still hooked up to an IV. My phone rang. It was my husband, Mark. He was picking up the kids from school. You okay? His voice dropped when I didn't answer. They're accusing me of abusing work hours for treatment, Mark. They want the money back, as if I faked being sick just to steal company time. Damn it, Arya. You can't let them do that. You worked through everything, even when the doctor said to rest. I have proof. Emails, work logs, performance reports. I'm not afraid. But truthfully, I was. Not afraid they were right, afraid of their power. They had lawyers, legal budgets, and language sharp enough to twist facts, turning me from a victim into a culprit in the eyes of the world. I opened my laptop. Every file documenting my completed work during my sickest days was neatly archived by month and by project. I even had thank you emails from clients on the very days I finished treatment. Tasha sent me a screenshot of our internal meeting calendar. I led a meeting the day after one of my chemo sessions. I printed it all, annotated everything. Every line of text was a stitch holding my dignity together. The dignity they were trying to tear apart. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat alone in my home office. The glow of the screen lit up my gaunt reflection in the mirror. I replayed the audio recording of my last meeting with Calvin, where he told me to my face that I no longer showed effort. Then I opened an old email from Ethan, creative director at Riverpine Hotels. Arya's insight into brand positioning has completely changed the way we approach our clients. I lifted my head. This wasn't about a job anymore. This was about honor, about dignity, about the right to be treated as a human being, not a number to be removed to boost investor metrics. Tomorrow, I would call a lawyer. But tonight, I would rebuild the case for my name. I wouldn't let them destroy me with cold lies wrapped in legal jargon. And when the truth came out, they would be the ones to pay. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Not out of fear, out of rage. Rage at how they thought I would stay silent while they crushed me. Rage that they believed just because I was battling cancer, I'd be too exhausted to fight back. They misjudged the wrong woman. I started with the simplest thing, backing up all my work emails from the old account I still had access to. I saved every client exchange thank you notes, positive feedback, even midnight emails when I provided emergency support for the event team in Colorado. Next came the performance dashboards, quarterly reports from the internal finance team that clearly showed I had exceeded targets by 112% in the last 2 quarters. I gathered the strategic meeting minutes I had once led before Calvin cut me out of the table. Most importantly, I compiled a detailed log of my entire treatment schedule. It included hospital bills, doctor appointment slips, chemo infusion times, and login records from the internal system, along with group meeting participation and timely report submissions. Everything matched, down to the exact minute. Mark helped me print every document, organizing them into sections with clear explanations. Meanwhile, I wrote a 3-page statement, not emotional, not dramatic, just the truth. The truth about 17 years of service, about Calvin's data manipulation, and about the executive board relying on false information to make a disastrous decision. I didn't send that letter to the executive team. I knew they'd ignore it or deflect. Instead, I sent it directly to the 3 investment firms controlling Everland: Monarch Capital, Darwin Equity, and Lucent Holdings. I had interacted with their senior representatives at many industry conferences before. I had direct emails, names, and full context. The subject line I wrote was brief: essential information to protect investment value in Everland hotels. I attached all the documents, clearly numbered and organized by category: professional achievements, internal evaluations, client communications, medical schedule and work activity, misconduct by senior leadership. In the opening of the letter, I wrote, I am not writing to request reinstatement or to complain about my termination. I write to ensure that you, as financial stakeholders in Everland, have access to the truth, unfiltered by biased internal reporting and personal agendas. I believe in transparency, and I trust you do as well. I scheduled the email to send at 8 o'clock the next morning, right as the weekly fund management meeting typically began. When I hit the final confirm button, I didn't feel nervous, I just felt relief, like I had finally set my voice free from the locked room it had been trapped in for so long. Before going to bed, I received a message from Jasmine, a former colleague in the analytics department. Aria, something big just happened. Calvin just signed off on cutting 12 more employees to lighten the load before audit season. Jamie's on the list. I bit my lip. Jamie, who had been with the company nearly 14 years, just bought a house, and her son had just started school. I stared at my phone screen. They weren't stopping. They would keep going until no one had the strength left to stand up. But I had stood up, and I had just stepped onto the board. Tomorrow morning, 3 major investors would read my email. They could ignore it, or they could realize that if they did nothing, the value of the company they were investing in would fall into the hands of someone tearing it down from within. I turned off the lights. For the first time in many nights, I fell asleep without resentment. I had done the right thing, and I knew the response would come sooner than I expected. At 8:17 the next morning, just as I poured my first cup of coffee, my phone rang. The screen displayed Eleanor Vance, Lucent Holdings. I took a deep breath. I had never received a direct call from Eleanor, the woman overseeing strategic portfolios for the firm that held nearly 40% of Everland's shares. Hello, Aria. I've read through all of your documentation, Eleanor began, her voice calm but firm, and I want to confirm everything you provided is accurate. Absolutely. I can supply originals as well as third-party verification. Then we have a serious issue to address immediately. Thank you for having the courage to bring the truth forward. The call lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like a match striking a barrel of powder that Calvin Monroe had spent months building around himself. By 9:03, Everlynn's internal network was jammed with a flood of internal messages. According to Jasmine, the investors had called an emergency meeting with the board of directors. No agenda, no notice, and most notably, Calvin was not invited. They locked him out of the Zoom room, Aria, Jasmine texted me with a shocked face emoji. He tried calling legal, but they cut the call, too. I didn't know whether to laugh or worry. It felt like standing inside a storm I had started, but whose path I couldn't control. At 11:47, everything blew up. Internal memo number 114. Calvin Monroe no longer holds the position of Chief Operating Officer at Everlynn Hotels, effective immediately. A full internal review process is now underway. Personnel updates will be issued within 24 hours. I stared at the notice. Neat, cold. But behind it were hundreds of relieved sighs. People who had been suffocated by heartless spreadsheets. People who had been cast aside for not fitting into the optimization plan. Mark walked into the room and saw me frozen in front of the screen. They fired him? I nodded. This morning, just now. Mark chuckled. I only wish we had a camera rolling during that scene. The news spread like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, 3 old colleagues, Jamie, Paul, and Rebecca, messaged me. We've been called back. They hadn't yet signed new contracts elsewhere. Everlynn now needed them to repair fractured client relationships. Jamie even called me directly. I don't know what to say except thank you, Aria. I thought my career was over. They apologized. The board called me personally. I didn't need their thanks. I only needed to know that justice still existed, even if it sometimes arrived late. In the evening, while I was reviewing my treatment records to prepare for the next day's appointment, I received an email from the investment division at Monarch Capital. A single line, brief but heavy with implication. We will be revising the entire share transfer plan, transaction indefinitely suspended. Calvin had tried to turn Everlynn into a commodity. Tidy, easy to buy, easy to sell, regardless of where the real human value lay. But not anymore. Everlynn would no longer be a company of spreadsheets and hollow optimization models. At least not under his hands. I leaned back in my chair, eyes exhausted, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The battle wasn't over, but I knew I had just reclaimed the most important thing, the truth. 2 days after Calvin was terminated, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. On the other end was a calm, deep male voice that I immediately recognized. Aria, this is Michael Garvey, CEO of Garrison Publishing. I don't know if you remember me. I froze. Garrison, the biggest client I ever managed in my 8 years at Everlynn. They owned a chain of literature-themed hotels across the eastern United States. I not only led their branding strategy, I even attended the grand opening in Charleston where Michael had shaken my hand and said, "We didn't just choose Everlynn, we chose you." I swallowed. Yes, I remember very clearly. Is everything all right, Mr. Garvey? I just learned what happened. How they treated you. That you submitted documents to the investors. That you continued working through your treatment. I just have one question. Simple and direct. Would you be interested in joining Garrison? I went silent, thinking I had misheard. You mean work with you at Garrison? Not with, for. Director of Marketing for the hotel division. You know our brand better than most insiders. And more importantly, you've just proven you're not only talented, you're resilient. We need someone like you to lead us through this next restructuring phase. I was speechless. Since leaving Everlynn, I had submitted 7 job applications. 4 companies rejected me without reason. The other 3 expressed great interest, but disappeared after I disclosed I was undergoing maintenance treatment for stage 2 cancer. I had mentally prepared to wait a long time for another opportunity, but it came sooner than expected. From the person who had believed in me the most. I replied carefully. I need to be clear about one thing, Mr. Garvey. I'm still undergoing maintenance treatment. Once a month. It could last another 6 months. Arya, my sister is an ovarian cancer survivor. I've seen firsthand how the system forces patients to choose between their health and their careers. But here, you won't have to choose. You'll work on a flexible schedule. Compensation will match your ability and will cover your full medical insurance. I raised a hand to cover my eyes. The emotions overwhelmed me. No one had ever told me that my health was a priority. Only questions like, can you maintain productivity? Can you still meet performance goals? Michael continued. If you accept, I'd like you to start next week. The design team is waiting on approval for the fall campaign at the Venice Resort. I think they'll enjoy working with the person who created the brand identity from day one. I didn't think twice, not because I was reckless, but because I knew exactly what value I held and who truly saw it. Accept, Mr. Garvey. See you at Garrison's office. No, Arya. See you where you truly belong. I hung up and looked out the window. The sun was rising after a long stretch of darkness. Tasha's texted me right then. Heard you got a new job? Evelyn is freaking out over the news that you're with Garrison. They really thought you'd vanish for good. I replied with one simple line. They me should have known. I don't disappear. 2 weeks into my new role at Garrison Publishing, I received an email from an address I thought I'd never see again. Subject line, invitation for dialogue and consideration for reinstatement. I stared at the screen. Part of me found it laughable. The other part just felt empty. In the letter, the new executive board, under direct oversight from the investors, wrote that they were deeply regretful for the mishandling of personnel matters under former COO Calvin Monroe, and wished for me to consider returning to contribute to the company's recovery and brand rebuilding phase. No apology, no line of personal accountability, just hollow phrases dressed up as urgent appeals. I didn't reply immediately. I closed the email and stepped out onto the balcony of my new office on the 14th floor of the Garrison building. From here, I could see the Hudson River shimmering in the late afternoon sun, and far in the distance, the old library building where I had launched my very first campaign with Garrison. Back then, just a short-term freelancer. I never thought that place would become the starting point of my second life. At Garrison, I didn't have to hide the days I was tired from medication. I didn't have to prove every minute of work to earn trust. I was heard in meetings, called by my name, not by my title, treated like a whole person, with strengths and temporary limits alike. Michael, the CEO, stopped by my office every morning, not to check in, but just to ask one simple question. How are you feeling today? No spreadsheet could measure what it means to be acknowledged like that. No KPI could capture the healing that took root inside me after everything that had happened. I reopened the email from Evelyn and wrote slowly. Thank you for the offer. However, I've found a place where I can continue growing my career. A place that respects not only my abilities, but also understands the value of loyalty and humanity. I wish Evelyn all the best in its upcoming restructuring phase. I clicked send and never looked back. That evening, I took my whole family to a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn to celebrate after receiving my latest lab results from the doctor. The numbers were stable. Mark raised his glass, his eyes glowing. You finally get to be yourself, Arya. Not a downsized version to fit the job. Not a name buried under spreadsheets. I smiled. I didn't need anyone to save me, Mark. I just needed a place that wouldn't kill what makes me human. The kids argued over which dessert to pick. I sat in the middle, my hand resting on Mark's, my heart as light as the breeze. I once thought losing Evelyn meant losing everything, but it turns out it was only the end of a suffocating chapter. Losing it gave me the chance to step into something better. And sometimes the greatest triumph isn't revenge. It's living well, living true to the value others once tried to bury. I was betrayed. I was hurt. I fell apart. But I didn't break. I simply shed my old shell, like an aging tree discarding bark to make way for new green growth. The old chapter has closed. In the next one, it's mine alone. Arya's story is a powerful reminder that dedication and resilience are never wasted, even in toxic environments or through the hardship of illness. When betrayed by the very place she gave 15 years of her life to, she rose, not for vengeance, but to defend her dignity and the truth. In real life, we can't control how others treat us, but we always have the power to choose where we invest our time, our energy, and our worth. What'd you think of Arya's journey? Did she make the right choice in leaving behind those who betrayed her for a place that truly values who she is? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories.